That Steele dossier that alleged former President Trump had connections to Russia during the 2016 campaign.
If you look, the guy's knee wasn't even on his neck like that.
Did it appear that Mr. Floyd said, "I ate too many drugs"?
Thank you. I'm sorry.
A lot of stuff going on today. George Floyd's family sues Kanye West for $250 million. Big acquittal in the Steele Dossier case with John Durham featuring Trump. All of that stuff and more coming up on this episode of Daily Caller Live. My name is Jobob. Thanks so much for tuning in. Daily Caller Live starts right now.
3, 2, 1.
Here we go.
Might be the only brown guy on earth named Jobob.
That is actually her name, Jobob.
Live from the dingy bunker, completely cut off from the outside world, except for you fine folks. My name is Jobob. This is Daily Caller Live. Thanks so much for tuning in. On today, it is October 19th, the year of our Lord 2022. I have a DMV appointment today, and I'm dreading it, honestly dreading it. But a lot going on in the world today. Like I said, George Floyd's family is suing Kanye West. We'll get into that. California finally making an announcement via COVID in their emergency. Joe Biden with a Roe codification midterms push. But before any of that, I want to get into this. This is going to be, I think, the big headline story, especially in your lefty media, that is going to suck up the airwaves for probably, a good while. Now, just to preface this, I feel like we're going to have to recontextualize what's going on here. The Steele dossier, the Russian probe, Russian collusion, tapping Trump's phones, Igor Danchenko, a lot of stuff we're going to have to set up. So if you already know all of this and you're watching this on playback, go ahead and fast forward like 3 or 4 minutes. Because I do want to give this a full amount of attention because I think, again, this is going to be a big story, especially in your lefty media. A lot of MSNBC, CNN, and even the nightly news channels last night were saying, well, this makes the Steele dossier look real. That is not the case. That is not what's happening. And there's also a really interesting New York Times article that I want to bring on here to kind of outline what people now accept as truth versus what I think a lot of Americans think. So just FYI, let me just start reading this. So
We're going to turn to the major headline involving that Steele dossier that alleged former President Trump had connections to Russia during the 2016 campaign. Well, tonight, an analyst accused of lying to the FBI about providing some of the information in that dossier has now been acquitted of all charges. Let's get right to our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, with us live from Washington. Pierre, what have you learned?
David, tonight a jury in Alexandria has decided that special counsel John Durham failed to prove that the chief investigator on the Steele dossier lied to the FBI about his role. The acquittal of Russian analyst Igor Danchenko on all 4 counts effectively means that the second significant case that Durham took to trial also ended in acquittal. So Durham is winding down his work without a successful conviction of any top government official in connection with his probe of the Justice Department's investigation into Russia's alleged ties to former President Trump. Durham is expected to complete his final report in the coming weeks, David.
All right, Pierre Thomas tonight. Thank you, Pierre.
Okay, sorry about that. I had a little bit of a technical difficulty. The camera snafu'd, so we just played that clip probably sooner than we probably should. But to lay this out, a guy named Igor Danchenko is a key witness to the FBI. I don't want to say authenticating the Steele dossier, but the Steele dossier was used in FBI protocol to be part of the plan to tap Donald Trump's phone. Now, I want to start reading from this article from the New York Times. Again, the New York Times, interesting because not a conservative-leaning news outlet, not a right-leaning news outlet by any stretch of the imagination. But it's interesting. So obviously they have a perspective here, but it is interesting to see what even people at the New York Times now consider to be true. Because I guarantee you it's not the same thing that a lot of your lefty media considers to be true. In the closing arguments, a prosecutor working for Mr. Durham asserted that Mr. Danchenko had clearly lied to the FBI and that his false assertions had a material effect. First things first, trying to prove that somebody knowingly lied in a court with a jury is unbelievably difficult. Just so you know, people are going to be like, oh, this is guaranteed proof that the Steele dossier was real and legit, and everybody should believe it. Look, the case was difficult to prove in the first place, and also there's some couple things that went on in the courtroom that were kind of interesting too. But this goes on to, let's see. He pointed to the part, this is the prosecutor working for the Durham probe, pointed to the part of the dossier that the FBI cited to bolster its application to wiretap former President Trump's campaign advisor with quote-unquote ties to Russia. The defendant's lies caused intensive surveillance on a U.S. citizen, said Michael Keelty, an assistant to the special counsel. So the Durham probe was looking to prove that this guy Daschenko lied to the FBI about the Steele dossier. Okay, so that's all they're trying to prove here. They're trying to prove that Daschenko knowingly lied. This is not at all absolving anybody of wrongdoing, especially when it comes down to the actual specifics of the Steele dossier. The New York Times goes on, but the defense said the government's own evidence showed that Daschenko did not lie. Yada, 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 yada. The lawyer for Daschenko characterized Mr. Daschenko as a valuable, honest person, yada, 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 unwittingly embroiled in political charges. Okay, so get to this. After BuzzFeed published the dossier in 2017, public suspicions of Mr. Trump escalated, but it has since been discredited. That's what I think is freaking fascinating in the New York Times of all places. This line right here. After BuzzFeed published the dossier in 2017, public suspicions of Trump escalated, but it has since been discredited. What they're saying is that the whole Russian collusion thing has been discredited. Now, you're not going to hear that on a lot of lefty news chatter. You're not going to hear it on NPR. You're not going to hear it on MSNBC, CNN, all of your ABC network channels. ABC, I'm not trying to single out ABC. I meant to say alphabet channels. You're not going to hear that from pretty much anywhere, but in right here, this one line, but has since been discredited. Basically, what the Durham probe was trying to prove is that the former British intelligence agent Christopher Steele has exaggerated the gossip that Mr. Daschenko had gathered from him. Again, knowingly trying to prove that somebody lied is very, very difficult. But that's besides the point. What I'm trying to articulate here is stuff in this New York Times article is fascinating when it comes to whether or not the public believes what the New York Times believes to be true. The New York Times also said this, the dossier, look, are you hearing this anywhere else in your lefty media? This is, again, fascinating what the New York Times thinks is true. The New York Times says the dossier was a political opposition research indirectly funded by the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016 in the Democratic National Committee. What? I knew that. You knew that. We all knew that. But the New York Times is blatantly stating it here in this piece about the Daschenko trial. Indirectly funded by the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee, they paid a law firm, which paid a research firm, which in turn subcontracted a company run by Mr. Steele. Mr. Steele hired Mr. Daschenko to canvass contacts in Russia and Europe about Trump's business dealings in Russia. Look, okay, this is not groundbreaking new information for me and you. I think if you've been following this story, and if you haven't, sorry that we're going through all of this. I think it's super important to understand the landscape of the political wheeling and dealing. But if you've been following this, you know that. We all know that. And I think we were called conspiracy theorists and crazy people when people like Tucker would point that out, or anybody. But now the New York Times is stating plainly that the Clinton campaign and the DNC paid a firm which paid a research firm. Again, not new information, but it's interesting to see them admitting this. Mr. Daschenko verbally conveyed rumors that Trump's campaign was colluding with Russia and that Russia had blackmail tape of Trump with prostitutes in a hotel room in Moscow. Okay, all that stuff has been discredited. So the bottom line here is, okay, let me read this last line really quick. But during the interview with the FBI, Mr. Daschenko said that he saw the dossier when BuzzFeed published it, and that Mr. Steele had exaggerated his statements, portraying uncorroborated gossip and speculation as fact. What this basically is is trying to point out how I think the media is going to portray this, how all of your lefty outlets are going to portray this sort of thing as, well, look, this proves, given that the Durham probe could not get a conviction of this guy, Igor Danchenko, this proves that the Steele dossier was legit and Donald Trump was definitely in bed with Russia, even though the Mueller report and pretty much everybody, including the New York Times here, now agrees that, yeah, some of this stuff is entirely bunk. What I want to get across here is that this acquittal from, again, a jury in Alexandria, Virginia, which is not known to be a conservative enclave, if you know anything about the demographics of Alexandria, Virginia. The acquittal of this guy, Danchenko, doesn't mean anything other than the Durham probe couldn't prove that he knowingly lied. I tweeted as soon as I found out about this, jury finds Igor Danchenko entirely and completely gullible. Because that's it. Nobody's disputing the fact that Danchenko talked to the FBI. The Steele dossier was paid for by the Clintons and probably entirely bunk. Nobody's disputing that fact. What they're disputing is whether or not Danchenko knowingly lied. And it turns out, one, that's a very difficult thing to prove, and two, the jury didn't think so, which is fine. That doesn't discredit any of this other stuff that the New York Times is admitting to in this article. Anyways, let me see if I can get some comments here. Some people said they've lost faith in the judicial system and the legal system. Yeah. Let me see. Oh, there's some interesting comments here talking about the live acquittal is not a good thing for conservatives either. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just telling you what it is. What I'm saying, what I'm trying to get across, and I feel like I'm repeating myself, so I'll move on here in a little bit because the Kanye story is also fascinating. What I'm trying to get across is that when you see people on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, Instagram, all this sort of stuff, it's, oh, Danchenko is acquitted, because I've seen so many people on TikTok specifically saying, well, this means that the Steele dossier was true. That's just not the case. Everybody is in agreement that Danchenko talked to the FBI and the FBI used the Steele dossier as a means to bolster their their ability to wiretap the Trump campaign office. Nobody's disagreeing with that. They're disagreeing with whether or not Danchenko knew he was lying or he was just a bumbling idiot. That's that. That's the point I wanted to get across, and I feel like I've done that a lot. Okay. Let me see. Okay, I want to get to this because I think this is also big and important and interesting. George Floyd's family is suing Kanye West. Now, I would like to make it clear. Well, I also want to remind people that I warned, I think, everybody on this show, 2 weeks ago, when Kanye did an interview with Tucker. I think I came on here plainly saying, hey, just FYI, Kanye is a loose cannon. And although we may agree with some of the things that he says, which is fine, there's going to be a lot of stuff probably that he says that are not fine. Kanye has gotten a lot of heat for some pretty bad comments, pretty bad anti-Semitic comments. And that's not okay. But also, if I were to point out the silver lining of the Kanye West saga, it would be that there are things that people say that you could 100% agree with, and then things that the same person can say that you completely disagree with. Both of those things should be true in a time where we are split up by partisan divides of whether or not you voted for Trump or did not vote for Trump. People get categorized as, well, you voted for Trump, you must agree with everything he says. No. That's just not true. Or you voted for Biden, you must agree with everything he says. Nope, that's not true either. Americans aren't so binary in their political beliefs that they agree with everything everyone that they vote for says all the time. I think Kanye could be a good example of that. There are things that he says that I'm like, yeah, that's a fascinating point, especially coming from someone like him in his position. But also, there's other stuff that he says that is nuts. Anyways, before we get on with that, so this is the big news story with Kanye West. If you're not familiar with this, Kanye got kicked off of Instagram, Twitter, all of the social media platforms. He then bought Parler yesterday, I think, or over the weekend. Parler's another one of your apps that we are not streaming on, and I think I have a Parler account, but I don't use it really ever. But Kanye then bought his own social media platform and now is being sued for $250 million, $250 million by George Floyd's family for saying this. Watch this clip and we'll discuss on the other side. And also, there's so much going on here. All right, watch this clip and we'll talk about it. Also, if you haven't already, would really appreciate it if you click the little like button and the little share button. Really appreciate you doing so. Greatly benefits us as we continue to keep the ball rolling on this Daily Caller live show. Check it out. This is very short, but this is why George Floyd's family is suing Kanye West.
If you look, the guy's knee wasn't even on his neck like that.
Oh, wow. That was even shorter than I thought it was. Oh, that's right, because there was a bunch of other stuff at the end of this that I didn't feel like showing or clipping into it. Basically, Kanye is making the case that George Floyd was killed by a drug overdose and not a police's knee on his neck, which is fascinating considering the Derek Chauvin trial that found him guilty of murder that will definitely be appealed because a lot of information is now being put together more cohesively and it's going to get really interesting. Okay, so Kanye says George Floyd died of a fentanyl overdose. George Floyd's family says, no, we're going to sue you for $250 million. A bunch of people on the Black Lives Matter side are saying, well, the law already said what happened. There already was a trial to show that George Floyd was murdered by police officer Derek Chauvin. Fine. Yes, that's true. Having said that, I think those people are misunderstanding the legal system and how it works in a lot of different ways. Remember O.J. Simpson was acquitted of murdering, now I can't think of their names, those two people, his wife and lover. Remember how O.J. Simpson was acquitted of that, but then found guilty in a civil suit, meaning that two separate cases and two separate legal things found the opposite things to be true? So that's a problem with the thinking that, well, it's already been legally settled, therefore Kanye doesn't have a case. He's in a bad spot. And on top of that, especially with the new documentary that just came out with the Daily Wire. So I'll be honest, I've been very busy and haven't got a chance. They sent me the Daily Wire, our friends over at the Daily Wire, and Candace sent over a copy of the Greatest Lie Ever Sold, the BLM documentary that I think premiered last Wednesday, premiere that I was not able to go to, which I wish I would have, because Kanye and Kid Rock and Ray J and Colby, a bunch of people showed up to that. I wish I could have been there, but I wasn't. Anyways, the good folks over at the Daily Wire and Candace's team sent over a copy. I haven't watched it yet, but my wife and I are planning to watch it together tonight, and I can bring you some of that, which I'd love to do tomorrow in reviewing that film. But at the same time, kind of jumped the gun here because I think some key parts of Kanye West's argument that he will be making, which will probably also be a part of the Derek Chauvin appeals case, are pretty well outlined in a couple clips from that documentary. Watch this. This is a little bit long-ish, but it is kind of interesting. This is from our friends over at the Daily Wire and Candace's new documentary called BLM, The Greatest Lie Ever Sold. Kind of repositioning Kanye's... well, this is probably what led Kanye to say what he said, which led the George Floyd family to sue Kanye for what he said. Check this out, a little bit longish, and if you haven't already, would appreciate while you're watching it, or just right now, click the little like button or the little share button, or give us a comment, let us know what you think about Kanye, especially being all over the news right now. Check it out. Watch this.
They had to have the jury believe that it was a neck restraint, it was the knee on the neck, it was asphyxiation that killed George Floyd. However, there was a ton of evidence that George Floyd consumed a toxic, lethal cocktail of fentanyl and methamphetamine.
Did it appear that Mr. Floyd said, I ate too many drugs?
Yes, it did.
Let's put it in perspective. 3 grains of fentanyl on the head of a lead pencil, enough to kill you, enough to kill me. And so they had to continuously inculcate the public to believe that Derek Chauvin intentionally, premeditatedly murdered George Floyd, and drugs had absolutely nothing to do with it. As Lindsay and the toxicologist presented that awful testimony.
Do you recall describing the level of fentanyl as a fatal level of fentanyl?
I recall describing it in other circumstances. It would be a fatal level, yes, in other circumstances. Had Mr. Floyd been home alone in his locked residence with no evidence of trauma, and the only autopsy finding was that fentanyl level, then yes, I would certify his death as due to fentanyl toxicity.
Okay, so I would imagine that the appeals process / Kanye's case against, I don't know if the suit is for defamation. I'm not even sure entirely what it is. Let me see if I have an article here that I had pulled up. Yep, it is a defamation. George Floyd's family sues Kanye West for $250 million, alleging defamation and infliction of emotional distress following the rapper's comments about Floyd's death, per TMZ. So there is that. I want to get to some of these comments. Bob says Kanye has freedom of speech, First Amendment. Okay. Bob also said, Jussie Smollett says Kanye is lying. That's funny. It's a funny joke. Some people said found guilty because they didn't want riots. Okay. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with those opinions or the stuff that we bring on here, just pointing out some people's points of view that are kind enough to leave us a comment in the comment section. But the bottom line is this. The fact that Derek Chauvin was found guilty of murder does not necessarily make it a slam dunk for George Floyd's family to sue Kanye West again for $250 million. That's going to be its entirely own separate process, entirely own separate case. And I think there's going to be a lot of back and forth, especially because that's not going to be as public of a trial or a case, whatever. I don't know if this is arbitration by a judge. I have no idea how this works, but I would imagine it's probably not going to make the headlines nearly as much. There's not going to be really any political influence regarding this, whether or not Kanye defamed George Floyd with this. So there is that. Again, I reiterate this time and time again. Just because Kanye says some things that I agree with does not mean that I agree with Kanye wholeheartedly on all of the things he's said, because that's not how people work. I think it was Dana White. I was listening to a podcast. Dana White's the president of the UFC. Said something along the lines of like, he's like, I voted for Trump, but I don't agree with everything he says, because nobody agrees with everything anybody says. That's just not how humans work. I don't agree with everything my wife says. I think we have too many throw pillows on the couch. She disagrees. We have disagreements sometimes. That's just the way the world works. Nobody agrees with everybody on everything. Nobody agrees with anybody on everything. That's not a thing that happens. And so when I talk about Kanye and we bring Kanye up on some different stories, let's not get into this whole idea of, well, that must mean then, no, it doesn't. I want to get to this. This is something we didn't get to yesterday. And there's a video clip that I wanted that is attached to this that I probably don't want to play, but I'll just read to you what's happening. California announced, Tuesday, maybe over the weekend. Not really sure when this happened, because Gavin didn't do a press conference about this, because there's no way he would do a press conference about this. This is California specific, but at the same time, I think the rest of the country should be aware of what's going on in California. I think we should have a hyper-focused lens on California in the same way that the media has a hyper-focused lens on the state of Florida, specifically because Gavin Newsom is running for president in 2024. It's unannounced as of this moment. He's denying it as of this moment, but I guarantee you Gavin Newsom is running for president in 2024. I would bet literally everything I own that Gavin Newsom is running for president in 2024. Ugh. But the reason that he didn't announce this publicly in front of a camera talking to reporters is because that he does not want this to be out there as a big story. He kind of just wants it to go away quietly. So his office put out a news statement that Gavin Newsom announces the COVID-19 state of emergency will end on February 28th. The emergency will be over in 4 months. Interesting. 4.5 months away from the end of the COVID state of emergency. California's state of emergency will be terminated at the end of February. Governor Gavin Newsom's administration announced on Monday. The Newsom administration officials said Monday's announcement is meant to give state and local official governments, officials and businesses across California time to prepare. Oh, thank you, Gavin. Thank you so much for the time to prepare for the end of the emergency. The governor declared a pandemic-related state of emergency on March 4th, 2020. This is going to be 3 years. He's ending it specifically 4 days before the 3-year mark of a state of emergency. When did he get elected? 2018? Oh, his entire, like half of his governorship, actually more than half of his governorship, because he took office in 2019, which would mean that, 3 of the 4 years Gavin will have been governor has been under state of emergency with dictatorial power granted to him by nobody. The emergency was related to 596 rules, oh my gosh, in California, set in 74 executive orders, including governor's decision to impose a statewide stay-at-home order which shut down schools and businesses across California. Newsom administration officials said that about 5% of the emergency-related rules were in effect as of Monday and set to expire at the end of February. Thank you, Gavin. Appreciate that, dude. Really, really stoked about your ending the state of emergency here in the state of California. And again, I know that not a lot of you live in California, but oh, this is funny. I got to bring this on. This is very funny. Eric says, how can Newsom foresee COVID emergency will be over in 4 months? I don't know. Only God knows. Will COVID be over in 4 months? It's not up for us to decide, Gavin. COVID will be around as long as it wants to be around. And there's no way we can give up this state of emergency and emergency powers this soon and this recklessly. I believe the last governor that's still holding on to those emergency powers is Inslee, Governor Inslee in Washington. Maybe not the last governor, but the most public. And by most public, I mean the person that I see the most, our good friend Ari Hoffman over at the Post Millennial, who does a show in the Seattle area, tweets like every single day. Jay Inslee has held power for like 1,000-something days, and I think it's pretty funny. Anyways, lastly, before we go, I want to get to this. I think this is. We almost made it the entire show without playing a clip of Joe Biden saying something dumb. But here's a clip of Joe Biden saying something dumb. This is at a Roe versus Wade in the midterms. They're trying to... I think this is bad political strategy. Again, as a political strategist formerly, or whatever you want to call what I used to do in the political field, I think this is bad strategy. I don't think that a lot of Americans are really rallied around the cause of reinstating Roe versus Wade. I think it's pretty low on their priority list. I think inflation, gas prices, food prices, just living in general, the border, I think all of those issues are way ahead of reinstating or codifying Roe versus Wade. But Joe Biden did a rally yesterday in which he is making an attempt to get Americans to pay more attention to Roe versus Wade and therefore vote on that issue in the midterms. I don't think it's a good strategy, but by all means, go for it. During that speech, well, at the end of that speech, he said something dumb. He said a bunch of things that were dumb in the speech, but there's a bunch of other stories to get to, but I thought this is a 10-second clip, 5-second clip of Joe Biden at the end. Watch. He apologizes for his presidency. Anyways, watch this, and we'll wrap it up after that.
So vote, vote, vote. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you. I'm sorry. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you. I'm sorry.
I don't know. Sometimes it's difficult to muster up the strength to roll my eyes back as far as I do. But I'm sorry. Thank you, and I'm sorry. At least he's apologizing. Silliness coming out of the White House on so many different angles. Let's see. That's going to do it for us today. There's another comment that I did want to get to that I thought was pretty funny. And again, I don't know how serious some of you people are in the comment section. But Chester says, "You're all domestic terrorists." Chester, I would like to respond to you by correcting your grammar. It's the wrong form of your. If you're just listening to this, he spelled it Y-O-U-R. Not U-R, Y-O-U apostrophe R-E. I am a grammar National Socialist, and therefore I must correct all of these things. He also left the S off of terrorists. And therefore, I will not engage with your name-calling and ridicule, despite how incorrect it would be. You're all domestic terrorists. Thank you, Chester, for calling us such. Ryan says, he's saying sorry for starting World War III and the Second Great Depression. None of those things have yet happened, and hopefully they don't. But at the same time, who knows? Who knows? Wow, a lot of people engaging in the comment section on the sorry quote, which I don't know why. I don't know why he's saying that sort of stuff. Anyways, that's going to do it for us today. I appreciate you sticking around, tuning in. If you haven't already, give me a follow on any of your social media platforms. Just type in JOBOB. My wife wanted to announce that. I know a lot of you don't live in California, but if you do live in California, tomorrow night, let's say around 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern. Well, if you're on the East Coast, I don't know why you would care about this. My wife had a pretty good idea of, hey, why don't we go through the propositions and do like a podcast about it as someone who's pretty engaged, and her as someone who is way more engaged than your average voter, I think. But also has a job where she doesn't have to deal with politics all the time, and sometimes can leave some gaps in the understanding of how things work. I thought that was a great idea because I feel like there's a lot of people in her position that are engaged, but not that it doesn't consume their everyday life. So if we can, I don't know, my wife and I are just gonna have a conversation about what are the props in California, how should we vote on them, what are the political angles being sought after here. And I feel like that's going to be an interesting conversation. We'll do that tomorrow on my Facebook page, which is Wrong Here in the Chiron. Just kind of chat about what elections look like, especially in various places, but more specifically in California. So we'll do that about 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern. But again, I don't understand why you would watch that if you're on the East Coast. Lastly, that's it. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Anything else to be wary of coming up in the next couple days? I don't think so. Next Wednesday, what is that? The 26th, I'll be in, South Dakota, I think. Brookings, South Dakota, or maybe it's North Dakota. I will get solidified information on where I'm going to be, but I'm doing a stand-up show, a late-night stand-up show on either the South Dakota campus or the North Dakota campus, the state university. South Dakota. Okay. I'm going to be in Brookings, South Dakota at the University of South Dakota State University doing a comedy show. If you're in South Dakota and happen to be watching this, come check it out, and we'll have a great time. That is next Wednesday. I can't think of anything else. My brain's fuddled. I'll see you same time tomorrow, same time, same place. See you then. God bless America.